So the question on everyone's mind is, what is the right way to do a resume? How can I do a resume that's going to help me stand apart from the competition? So this is a resume crash course. I thought I would use a picture from when I crashed my Ferrari last year. I obviously have a Ferrari as an English teacher. Okay, so the purpose of your resume, first off. Remember, audience purpose and context is what it always comes down to when you're trying to come up with some writing decisions. So let's look at the purpose for your resume. Well, first off, it's a textual introduction to you, to who you are. This is about the only impression they're going to have of you, the person that you're applying for the job. And they're going to have to try to put a story together about who you are and what you're capable of doing simply by these textual bits of information about yourself. Obviously, it's used to apply for jobs. I don't have to get into too much detail about that. It's still somewhat the standard. The resume is changing, the medium's changing, the format of it is changing a little bit, but the underlying idea that it is a historical list of all the things that you've done in the past and all the things that you're capable of doing is always going to remain the same as you apply for jobs. It's giving you an opportunity to network. Now, sometimes you might use a resume simply to get your name out there. Maybe there's not a job available at a particular place that you want to work. For example, you want to work at Kohl's, let's say, but you find out that there's not going to be any openings for a number of months. Well, if you meet someone at Kohl's, or if you find someone at Kohl's online, send them your resume, send them a link to the resume, and then I'll help them to understand who you are so that they can turn to you when the jobs are open. The resume actually provides an outline for an interview. A lot of people don't realize this, but from the perspective of the person who's interviewing you, they're going to use that resume to come up with a lot of the questions. So as you're creating the resume, that's a great opportunity for you to practice and think about what questions they might ask related to each line of that resume, and then practice what your response might be. A resume is used also to narrow the field of job applicants. Now, this is kind of a cynical point of view, but sometimes a resume is used to determine that they're not even going to follow through on something. Like if you open up a huge packet of job applications, let's say there's like 500 people applying for the one job that's there. Now the potential employer is going to weed through all these resumes and actually throw away resumes that do not seem credible, do not seem professional, resumes that have errors in them. I mean, if you have spelling errors or you have grammar errors in your resume, you're just giving someone an excuse to throw away that resume, because there's so many people applying for jobs in this day and age that they need some way to thin out the group of people. And a lot of times the first place that they do that is the resume. So you have to learn how not to be part of that group of people who gets thinned out, who gets thrown away. Resume serves as a calling card. It's similar to a business card that you would hand out to someone. Let's say you meet someone at a conference or convention. You can give this resume to them and they can use that to follow through with you later on down the road. So remember, purpose, audience, and context. Let's look at the audience of your resume. Now, I can only give you a general outline of the audience because your audience is going to be so narrowly defined and so complex for every job that you apply for. That's incredibly important to remember. What you do in your resume really does not come down to what has always been done. It doesn't come down to even what career services say that you should do or what books say you should do about resumes. What comes down to what you should do about resumes is who are you writing this resume to. Remember, for the most part, they are overwhelmed decision makers. So they're executives within companies who have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of obligations aside from finding job applicants. So you do not want to hinder their ability to do their other jobs. And you don't want them to think that you think you're the center of the world, that they're dropping a bunch of stuff to find a job applicant, because oftentimes they're not. This is just something that they're doing on the side. Sometimes, though, in cases of human resource specialists, that is one of their main jobs, is to go through these resumes and thin out the applicants before they send those on to the departments. So think about that. Also, think about this. The people that are reading your resumes are not only the people who may or may not hire you, but they're also the people who will potentially work with you. And so if you were in their perspective, let's say you were at a job and they're trying to bring in a new colleague, you would want to read that resume very carefully and you'd want to find out if you have something in common with that colleague, if that colleague seems trustworthy, if that colleague seems like they're going to be able to work as a team with you. And so, in addition to trying to present yourself as a great job applicant, it's really important to present yourself as an awesome colleague, as somebody that your coworkers would be happy to talk with, happy to share ideas with, happy to visit in your cubicle or whatever, wherever you are, whatever the context of the work is. People should want to be with you and spend time with you. Okay, so here's some questions they ask. As I just mentioned, do I want this person to be my colleague? Does this person seem kind of arrogant or kind of self-centered? Or does this person seem really sharing, really kind, really experienced, and I can learn from this person, I can work with this person? Does this person have the skills to move the company forward? Remember, anytime you're writing in the professional realm, you need to think of your audience as self-centered, selfish. They always want to figure out, as they read, what's in it for me. This is especially the case when you are applying for a job. The person reading it wants to say, can this person improve this company? Not, can I give this person their dream job? Not, can I give this person an opportunity to succeed? That's not the case. They don't want to necessarily give you your dream job. You getting your dream job is a byproduct of you having the skills to move the company forward. So do it for the company, do it for the audience. One other thing they're looking at, does this person have specific past moments of hard work to support their claims? Can this person provide me with examples, concrete illustrations of what they've done in the past, whether that be work together as a team, act ethically, act with integrity, whatever they've done in the past? Can they provide examples and stories of that so that I can be convinced that they're going to do it in the future? So let's look at the basics of the resume. So first off, what is it containing? Now again, resumes are going to be different depending on who your audience is, what the context is, and what the purpose is. But there's almost always some kind of heading involved in it. Okay, that's going to be the information about yourself. First off, your name, your first and last name, and then the information about where you can be located. It's going to be your address. That's pretty much standard at the very top of a resume. When it comes to electronic resume like LinkedIn, you do have your first and last name on there. Your address is not going to be as prevalent, but maybe your email address will be prevalent, or a number that they can text you at will be prevalent, or a number they can call you at will be prevalent, because the context of that is that you're setting up electronic communication as opposed to snail mail communication. Now, resumes, almost every resume used to have an objective that would explain what you wish to do, why you're writing this resume, what you're seeking. Now, depending on your audience purpose and context, you may not need an objective at all. Now, some people would say you should always have an objective or you should never have an objective, but that's not right. Okay, you can never make a decision unless you understand a very detailed analysis of the rhetorical situation. Does this audience seem to value objectives based on the research that I've done about them? Does this audience seem to take a more traditional approach to hiring people? If that's the case, if you're applying for a company that seems to take a traditional approach to hiring people, you would definitely want an objective. But in a lot of cases, companies don't necessarily take the old traditional approaches, and that's your responsibility to figure out if that company is traditional or not and set up an objective based on that. Now, this is pretty much regardless of company that you're applying for and industry. There's some kind of work history that needs to occur. Some kind of illustration of what you've done in the past, what your qualifications were. Now, depending on what your job is and what role is that you're going to play, that work history may not take as much of a priority as some other areas, but that work history should be there in one form or another. Education is going to be a component. Now, again, education doesn't necessarily have to be at the top of your resume. How can we determine whether or not to put education on a resume at all? Well, again, audience, purpose, and context. Every time I ask the question of what is the correct way to do a resume, you should always say the correct way to do a resume depends on audience, purpose, and context. So let me give you an example with education. I have a friend who is a physician's assistant, and he was applying for a job at Aurora Healthcare in Oconomowoc. and he chose to prominently feature his education at the very top of that resume. Why did he do this? Well, because he graduated from Yale Medical School. So of course, like that's an available means of persuasion. I graduated from Yale. I'm going to prominently feature that. Now, there's some people who've graduated from schools that maybe aren't as prominent as Yale, and that's okay. You just don't have to feature it as much. That's one instance. Now, another instance is think about your industry. Okay, so for me, I want to be a professor. If I'm applying for a professor job, you can certainly bet that I'm going to put education up there. That's a huge value of my audience. My audience is interested in schools and schooling, different types of schools that are out there. They're interested in seeing the approaches that people are taking to education. So that's going to be prominently featured up there. However, if I'm applying for, let's say, a summer retail job at Shopko, which is what I did when I was in college, why put education up there? Does that really matter? All they really need to know is that you're qualified for the position because you're 18, and education is not nearly as important. Again, this is always going to shift with audience purpose and context. Okay, other achievements and awards. Some audience purpose and context will require you to put more achievements than others. Some people may really be interested in awards, others may not. That's something to think about. Here's a little sample of kind of a traditional resume, at least the way it's laid out. You'll notice lots of white space here. You'll notice bold headlines and distinct sections. That's going to make it really easy for your reader's eye to move up and down throughout the resume because, for example, maybe they don't care that much about experience, but they care more about education. Well, this is what you've learned in professional writing, right? You have to make this information easily navigable. So if I'm reading this and I say, okay, there's the objective, got it. What about education? Well, my eyes can just easily skip the experience and go to education. So it's really important with the format to have lots of white space, lots of signposts that label and identify what sections we're talking about here. And then within those sections, you've got your subsections, which are bold headlines that, again, we can move our eye through that and skim through that as we need to. So that's a traditional resume. Now, again, this is always going to change with audience purpose and context. Let's take a look at the document design itself of resumes. Okay, how you arrange the different elements in it. In most cases, you're going to have a letterhead style heading, which is going to include, again, like your address, your name at the very top, and your address. Now, letterheads establish a lot of credibility. They look very professional. You get the impression that this is a person or this is a company that sends out a lot of information and that they can be trusted. So you got a letterhead style heading. As I mentioned before, the use of white space is of vital importance in pretty much any type of resume that you do. What does white space do? Well, it makes the information skimmable. It makes it welcoming to your potential reader. Remember, your reader is a busy executive in most cases, and they don't have a lot of time to weed through a bunch of junk and a bunch of paragraphs. They just want to zoom right into what they need to know. Using font sizes and styles strategically. You should use font sizes and styles within each section to indicate what you're doing when you're doing it. Now, as you saw in the previous example, they chose to establish for themselves the convention of using capital letters at the top of sections and then underline the top of sections. And then they chose to use bold underneath those as the subsections. Whatever you do, you have to make sure that it is consistent and that the person can easily navigate through your information, can easily skim through your information. Using bullets is almost always important in professional and technical writing. Again, it enhances your skimmability of your document, and it acknowledges that, hey, you may not be interested in everything that I have here. Ideally, they will be interested in everything that you have there because that indicates that your research was very effective and you figured out what's important to your audience and what they value. But in case you didn't do that very effectively, use bullets and lists to make it so that they can move through what they need to, that they can skip certain areas if they need to do that. Okay, and then make yourself the center. Now, again, that's the format, and that's putting your name at the very beginning. They should see that at the very beginning as if that was your title of all this information is all about you. Okay, some best practices for resumes. Probably the best practice is to adapt to the job description. Adapt that resume to what this job is looking for. You should have, as I mentioned earlier, you should have a master resume that includes all of your qualifications and all of your experiences. And then with